We're live. It's the Mindstate Marketing Hour.
Woo-hoo!
Hello.
With Will Leach. He's our favorite scientist. The scientist who doesn't wear a lab coat, doesn't carry a clipboard. What does he do? He writes a book. A book that has a new look. Marketing the Mind States. If you haven't read this book and you're writing content for your clients, your customers, your brand, then you're writing a one-size-fits-all message. And guess who loves to shop at a one-size-fits-all dress shop? Nobody.
I don't know anybody, Steve. I've never heard of that. Never.
If you just showed up every day and you got served whatever I cooked, what's that called? A crappy cafeteria.
I was about to say
I didn't think that's where you were going.
I mean, I'm not one size from month to month, so
Right,
you know,
really?
I mean,
And so that's why if you're doing that with your marketing message and you haven't read Will's book, then guess what experience the folks that are trying to learn about your brand are experiencing?
The crappy cafeteria.
It's the Mindstate Marketing Hour. How to use science to connect with your clients. Based on Will's book, Marketing to Mindstate. You can learn more at theMindstateGroup.com. Yeah, I swear I can say it. I've said it before.
Yeah, about 2 years worth. You got to get that out, man.
Yeah. So Will, who's this? We got a good-looking, handsome man over here. Got a sense of humor. Who is this?
We do. This is Kristian Alomá. I'm going to let Kristian talk a little bit more about his background, but we had to up the game. We needed more sexy on this show, Steve, to be honest with you. People have been, Kristian is the best. We needed more.
when does that start? Is that next episode?
Maybe afterwards. But so, hey, listen, guys, I am really excited to have Kristian on the show. Kristian and I go way, way, way back. Many years, where he helped me when I was over at PepsiCo, and he brought a brand new way of thinking. We've been friends ever since. And so just like all things, when we interview, we want Kristian to share with us his experience in behavioral sciences. We want him to talk about how he started his own company. We're going to talk a lot about his company, what he's doing out there to help businesses grow, and just really high level, guys. Kristian is in the world of narrative psychology and its importance to business. The guy is a beast in this space. He's the founder and the CEO of Threadline, and it's a consultancy that helps bring story into brands and growth. He uses narrative psychology, behavioral economics, as well as identity to really elevate the impact that brands have on their customers and on messaging and the whole experience. He is drawing on years of academic experience, and he's a Ph.D. So we're elevating not only sexy, but we're elevating competence on our show, Steve, which is awesome. He's also a lecturer at Kellogg School, Center for Nonprofit Management. He has a passion for nonprofit. He helps these nonprofits grow in his spare time. And the only thing I'm going to say that I don't like about Kristian is that he lives in Chicago. He's not close to me in Dallas. And we used to live relatively close to each other in South Florida at one point in life, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
I was down there in West Palm Beach, right?
Yeah.
So, listen, everybody knows you, Kristian. Everybody loves you, Kristian. Everybody wants to be you, Kristian. Welcome to the show. I'm really
Thank
glad
you.
to have you here.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me, and that is one of the most flattering introductions I think I've ever had. So I do appreciate it, and it has been a long time. Our relationship goes back many years, and I've always sort of said I'm just sort of following in Will's footsteps here, right? So he went out on his own. He started establishing some really great work. Wrote the book, so I'm trying to write a book now too, and things like that. So everything you do, I'm just trying to do a little bit less efficiently and less successfully. So
learn from my mistakes for sure, Kristian. So, to set up the stage, what we like to do is there's kind of two things I like. One, you're here because you live in this world of behavioral science, behavioral psychology, and it's a term that a lot of business owners and brand managers, they've heard of, but they don't really know much about. So I like to first talk a little bit about that world, like how, kind of about yourself, how you got involved with behavioral science, but then I want to shift into how you're actually using behavioral science, not just for your clients, but also are you using these things to grow your own business? And so we're going to shift at some point in the conversation, but just starting off, man, I just want the audience to get to know you a little bit. Like, tell us your story. Where'd you grow up? Who were you like? What were you doing? And then how in the world did you wind up in this space?
Yeah, no, thanks. So I grew up in South Florida, like you mentioned, Will, in the Fort Lauderdale area, and I grew up in a family of small business owners and entrepreneurs and teachers. Ultimately, right? It was one of those sort of classic stories of we always had jobs, we always had multiple jobs or multiple businesses running, and so I knew for a long time I wanted to follow in those footsteps. I wanted to run a business. I wanted to build a business, things like that. Although at the time when I was in Florida, I thought I wanted to be a quarterback for the NFL, for the Miami Dolphins, if I could. And that didn't pan out. If it's not obvious, yeah. So I pursued my academic career, and that brought me to the Midwest, right? And when I landed in the Midwest, one of the things that I knew was I wanted to do something creative, and I also wanted to be in business, and that's what advertising was to me, right? Was applying creativity to business challenges, and essentially, that's where I started, and I started building a career in advertising, and I quickly started to kind of realize in doing advertising and testing concepts and campaigns and things like that a lot of advertising, a lot of really successful advertising, sometimes happens accidentally. Right? It's you have a really empathetic creative, a really great creative who can come up with some ideas that they just know is going to motivate someone, but we don't know why. And the problem is that's a very inconsistent way to build a marketing department, a very inconsistent way to build a campaign or anything like that. And I remember sitting in a research facility testing a campaign, and it was for a pharmaceutical company at the time, and the physician's feedback on this campaign, we've spent hours putting this idea together, the gist, the copy, the images, all that sort of stuff, and the doctor says, "I don't like his shoes," right? And that's when I realized we're doing this wrong, right? We are not figuring out how to both test these campaigns and how to figure out why these campaigns are working. And I moved around a little bit, and I landed then finally in a research agency that was known for emotional branding, right? That was known for applying psychology to research methodologies, to strategic approaches and things like that. And that's where it really sort of started to tick for me, where it really started to kind of the ideas started to open up for me. And I remember going there and thinking about the best brands in the world that I knew of, right? The stores that people I knew of and the stores that I loved were typically small businesses, right? It's that local coffee shop, it's that cafe, it's that diner, and the owners, and you've gotten to know the owners. And I started thinking more and more about why that is, and I realized, what they've figured out, what they can do as a small business, maybe with one restaurant or one cafe or with one brand, is build relationships, right? And that's what brands ultimately were. And I started to wonder as I got into this agency, how do you take that thing that everyone does, that everyone is drawn to, right? Building relationships, and scale it, right? How do you make the big company build relationships, right? And so that's what we started trying to figure out, and that's what really kind of opened my eyes to the role psychology plays in marketing and branding overall. And I just followed that rabbit, right? I just followed that sort of string and pursued an academic career in psychology, got into consumer psychology and narrative psychology, and trying to understand the way people make sense of the world, and where brands fit into that, right? And that's why when you talk to folks, and I mean, I'm guilty of this every year, right? Of setting my New Year's resolutions to get healthier. And then I go out and I buy a whole new set of Nike gear because Nike makes me feel like I could go running, right? Now I fail, inevitably, after about 3 or 4 months, but the role of Nike is making me feel like I'm capable for that moment. And the same thing with Apple computers, right? They make me feel creative, and my oat milk makes me feel like I'm being healthier. All these sorts of things affect the way you feel about yourselves. And that's what we started to uncover, and ultimately that's what led to Threadline. And so now we've been doing this for 5 years, really trying to help organizations understand the way people think, right? How they're thinking about the world, how they think about themselves, how they think about the brands that they engage with, and then how that company can figure out the best role, the best relationship to build with that person. And that's largely driven by narrative. At least that's the framework that we use.
I love what you said. A couple of things is you kept using the word feel. And I think before I even got into this space, and even before Steve, we used to take it for granted that as advertising, we're just gonna help them feel more passion or whatever. And what I think, and you're gonna talk a lot more about this with Threadline and how you do your work, but there is science behind feelings. There is. It's not just like you said. It used to be just kind of we found that creative person that could tap into those feelings, and you would give them whatever they needed. Right. You would make them as happy as they can be. But there's actually science behind this stuff, and you've talked about narrative psychology and identity, and we talk about motivational psychology, but there's science behind this, guys. That's why I want you guys to know that you don't just have to rely on your own gut feelings. There is science behind. That's what Threadline, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what Threadline does about that. With that, I mean,
you know what's fascinating to me about this problem is you talk about that coffee shop on the corner and how they have this personality that you bring into as like a complementary aspect of your identity. Mm-hmm. Your identity is comfortable in that coffee shop, but when you take a bigger brand, the problem is how do you get your brand to have this personality that gives me a way to like see my identity, wearing those clothes, whether it's Nike or whatever. That's fascinating to me. How do you pump this animation into a brand that you bond with?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's exactly it. And that's the trick, right? Is with that mom and pop coffee shop, the brand essentially sort of resides within mom and pop and the customers, right? And so it's not difficult. You don't need to create a brand guideline document for that mom and pop cafe because they're just being them, right? If they're nurturing or they're caring or they're sweet or they're, sarcastic or whatever it is, that becomes the brand of that shop. And I think when you get to a place like Nike or Apple or just any company that is really scaling and growing, the question becomes, how do I take mom and pop, right, and teach these 50 new employees what their brand was and how to be like that brand? And how do I take what, mom and pop would just say or whatever sign they'd put in the window or whatever and turn that into a campaign that I can advertise against and sort of communicate and build out that brand, right? And that's what places like Nike have sort of ultimately figured out to some degree, and at least and had a great deal of success with, of how do we create those stories? And this is where we'll get into it for sure, right? Of the power of stories isn't just about communication, right? The power of stories is about helping people make sense of things, right? That's what narratives do. Narratives help us make sense of the world. And so when you start creating stories around your brand, you're essentially sort of proposing ways for people to make sense of your brand, right? And so if it's Jordan and it's those stories around Jordan of playing through the flu, right? That's a story of perseverance, of capability. But then you're starting to see more and more now, it's stories of not just the big famous folks, but the person who is still kind of on that pickup basketball court in that local neighborhood, right? And the stories of them. And so it's about helping people make sense of the role. And oftentimes in those campaigns, they don't feature, they don't highlight, they don't focus on the shoe the entire time. They're focusing on the person and what that person is able to do because of that. So it's really interesting. And Will, you mentioned something that I think is really important about the evolution marketing has been through, right? I think over the past 10 years, maybe even, I guess, probably 15 years now, I keep forgetting I'm old at this point, but 15 so years ago or so, right, is when we started to see like emotion become a thing. Like you said, and I think I term it a little bit of that. It was like the beginning of the cognitive revolution in marketing, and what happened was everyone was like, emotion's important, right? We need to make people laugh or cry or whatever, and I think that's where folks sort of emphasized, right, is they created campaigns that had just an emotion in them.
Yep.
And the problem was, I think that worked to an extent. It helped things go viral. It helped people cry, certainly, and all that kind of stuff. But I think what we see is people aren't singularly emotional, right? It's not as if I am just looking for confidence all the time, right? To your point, it's not one size fits all. Today, I might be happy. Tomorrow, I'm looking for affirmations. The next day, I'm trying to celebrate something, right? And so these emotions are shifting all the time. And when brands just latch on to one emotion and think that's their whole audience, or think that is that audience every day, they miss, right? They miss out on the fact that people are actually far more dynamic and far more complex than that. And that's where, again, I have a bias, but I think that's where story comes into play, because when you start telling those stories are all the emotions moving through, right? Their transformations, their conflicts, their tensions, their resolutions, and those stories can shift and change and be adapted and integrated into people's stories themselves, right? Where people start talking about what they were able to do and what they accomplished, and they start telling that to their friends and all that sort of stuff. So it's really powerful. There's a great deal of science to it. It's not just kind of a creative guessing game anymore, and it doesn't have to be anymore either.
That's right. That's right. Well, let's lead into, so you touched on narrative psychology and this idea that we evaluate the world through our experiences in our preconceived stories.
Yeah.
But tell us about, what does Threadline do to help brands use, I'm going to let you speak to it. Let them use your ideas around story. How do you impact and help brands use these?
Sure. Yeah. There's sort of two key services that we probably do most for most of our clients. And the first is research. And we do really sort of emphasize qualitative research methods. And the idea is, when we interview customers or clients or an audience, right, is we're not just going to ask them questions about what they want or what they prefer, or how often they've used it and would they use it again, type of thing. What we want to understand is their stories, right? If you want to understand a person, you've got to understand their stories. And so we typically will take folks through a series of story prompts in which we ask them to tell us about, the story when they first realized, they needed this category, and the story when they first used some product in that category, the story of using this brand specifically. Depending on the kind of category, we might start even earlier than that, or we might focus on sort of different angles of those stories. But the idea is we uncover those narratives and we see in the stories that people share with us patterns, right? Are they positioning themselves as heroes? Are they positioning themselves as victims? Are they positioning the other elements of that story in very sort of specific ways, right? Is an expert or a guide or a mentor part of that story, right? Is the product sort of seen as the shield? Is it seen as a sword? Is it seen as a potion that sort of transformed them from, I was ordinary Joe Monday through Thursday, but when I use this, this new shirt from this new store, I all of a sudden feel real confident, right? Or if I use this new product, this new lotion, I all of a sudden feel like I can face the world, right? Things like that. Or I feel like I have the energy to keep up with my kids and I can be a better dad, things like that, right? You start to see these elements in the story, and you'll see that in individual stories. And then when you do the 15, 30 interviews, you see that patterns across all of those stories. And so we take that and we say to clients, hey, here's what's happening in this space, right? Not just what they want, but why they were drawn to this category, and how they feel about this category, how they feel when they use a product, what their problems are at a deeper level, not just I need to put this nail into the wall, right? But are they trying to actually hang a picture because when they hang that picture, it makes it feel like a home, right? That's the tension that they're feeling, not just the job to be done per se. And so they're going through all of that. And so we reveal that and we share that to the client. We say, hey, listen, here's the story of your customer. Now, where do you fit? And that's what we do next, right? Is we help them figure out where in the story is the best fit for that brand. And, I've been thinking a lot about how we talk about it, and positioning is sort of often at play here. But sometimes it's not just positioning. It's about the strategy for messaging. It's about the strategy for creative or what have you. But it ultimately becomes auditioning for a role in their story. Right? If I'm a parent trying to figure out how to keep my kids engaged through the summer, right? Is this a product? Is this an app? Is this a service that makes me feel like you are helping me do that, right? You are sort of playing that role. And so it's oftentimes where we see clients struggle the most, because traditional marketing has taught us we need to talk about ourselves as if we are everything, right? We are the hero of everything. And when you're developing your own brand story and sort of identifying your brand identity, certainly you're the hero of that specific problem. But when you're building a relationship with someone else, the consumer needs to be the hero of their story. Because if you try to play hero in we're the reason you're a great mom, right? I think I heard a long time ago, it was a cat commercial. And the cat commercial said, "Is it love or is it our brand?" Right? That was sort of the gist of the tagline. And I thought, that's awful, right? You know, yes, you want the consumer to feel like it's love, not question whether it's just the fact that they're feeding this cat, right? And so you want the consumer to be the hero of their story, and it's about figuring out how you can make them that hero, or amplify that reward, or get rid of some of those challenges on the path to that sort of outcome.
And then real quick, Steve, and then by doing that, what can the brand do? Like, so you've told them that they are maybe not the hero or whatever. Then what, then the brand ideally then is becoming an integral part of that story. Ultimately, that's the idea.
Yeah, I mean, if they do that well, right, if they keep sort of playing that role, and of course it's not just deciding that, right, you've got to have the right messaging, the campaign, you've got to train your employees to support that story, you've got to make sure your experience is supporting that story, all those sorts of things. But if you do that really well, the consumer starts sort of integrating you into their story on their own. Right. And it's when they are talking about you, right, when they start saying, oh yeah, I had to sort of get this thing done, and so of course I'm going to get a I don't know, like a Nike shoe in order to make that race, or of course I'm going to buy this kind of car, or of course I'm going to get this brand of milk because that's the one that makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing, or makes me feel like I'm confident, or makes me feel like you know, it really sort of fills my needs. Now, consumers don't always talk like that, of course. They'll typically say it tastes the best, right? But when you really dig into those stories, you realize it's not just the taste, because a lot of things taste great, but only a few things make you feel a certain way. And when they've done that, that's when brands become really resilient in people's lives, right? It's harder. You know, I often sort of parallel it to when you build a relationship with someone, right? You start off in sort of that courtship phase, and then, you know, eventually, potentially, right, they become a significant other of yours, right? They might become a spouse in some way. And it's difficult to break a relationship between two people who have spent a great deal of time working themselves into each other's stories, and the same is the way for a brand. Once you've found that space, once you've integrated into their story, it's very difficult from a competitive perspective to break that, right? Yeah, they may try other things out, they may sort of do things, but then you become really loyal to that brand because they're the ones that have been there with you. I joke all the time, McDonald's is my favorite restaurant, right? Not because I think the meals are absolutely amazing and healthful and, you know, Michelin starred or anything like that. It's because as a child, every weekend, my grandparents took me to McDonald's as a break from my parents more than anything else, right? To give my parents a break. And it was that quality time with my grandparents at McDonald's that makes McDonald's my favorite thing. It is a part of my identity now when it comes to, if I ever have grandchildren, I'm taking them to McDonald's. Hopefully it's still around by that point.
Steve, did you see what just happened?
Yes.
Everybody, Louis made he doesn't do this, but not only do we have a sexy guest, but we have Louis who joined us.
I brought the animals in, Will.
It's
I'm like Dr.
Louis joined the show.
He brings all the cats to the yard, doesn't he?
That's right.
He does.
You know, you're telling that story. My grandmother would always pick me up on Friday evening. My brother and I, we'd stop at Dunkin' Donuts to get donuts for in the morning, and we get Wiener Schnitzel. Chili cheese dogs for dinner that night, and then we would have Coke floats. And that, you know, when you were telling that story, my brother, I just met him last Friday to, you know, drop off a trailer. I said, pick a place to eat, and he says Wiener Schnitzel.
Right?
Right?
Yeah.
That's crazy that how that does become something that, and why did he say that? Because it's a fond memory, a relational point with us.
Yeah.
So Kristian, let me push us to, okay, so you help great big brands, small brands, not for profit, kind of use this. But you also are in an industry that's highly competitive. We're kind of in the same industry.
Sure.
There are other companies have bigger resources than us, lots of marketing dollars, things like that. So you have to differentiate yourself. And probably you are using some of these own techniques on your own company. I know I tried the best I can. Steve tried to help me. Steve does my work better than me most times. So how are you using some of these ideas in narrative psychology to grow your own brand?
Yeah, that's the challenge, right? That's the cobbler's children that have no shoes sort of thing. Right. And and it's something I think about every day, and I think about just even making sure that I believe in what I'm telling clients to do, right? Like, am I using this? Am I testing this? And so I do, and ultimately, I think some of the decisions that I've had to make in regards to what I want the Threadline brand to be is what kind of story do I want to be around this brand? And there are a number of potential stories, a number of potential narratives a brand can choose, right? Do I want to try to be, the big Ipsos or the big consulting firm with hundreds of people everywhere, and they're sort of known for being a relatively high price tag and producing a lot of stuff for a lot of different clients, right? Do I want to be the boutique sort of one-man shop, right? And it's that sort of person you just call on and they do the whole project and that's it? Or do I want to be somewhere in between? And what I have really kind of tried to narrow it down to has been ultimately creating this sort of brand that is distinct in the relationship with our agency, right? I tell folks all the time, I don't think about competitors as competitors, right? The company that I left to start this one, I adore them. I think they're brilliant. I tell folks, hey, if you don't hire me, hire them, right? I think they're amazing, because I don't think, as you get into sort of these kinds of fields, a lot of insight agencies, a lot of approaches, a lot of methodologies really are just sort of different flavors of the same ice cream, right? What I think is really critical is what kind of experience did you have on that product, and how do they help you make sense of it? And so that's where I've tried to sort of focus the brand, right? And that's why you hear in copy on our website and my proposals and things like that. It's all about not just leaving you. I always like to use the metaphor of like, you're not just buying IKEA furniture and then I walk away, right? I'm going to help you build it. I'm going to help you make sense of what all of these pieces are, these hundreds of pieces. It's going to, by the time we're done with our project, I'm not just going to give you an Allen wrench. I'm going to say, here's a bed frame, right? Here's a chair. Here's something that you can make sense of it. So I really sort of make sure that we're emphasizing that in what we do. And then, beyond that, it's what's been really great about sort of starting a company and building a company is I'm not just thinking about customers anymore. I'm also thinking about the brand for my employees, right? And the brand of company that I want to start and thinking about, do I want to be the sort of agency that only prioritizes growth, and so we're saying yes to almost every project that comes in the door? Or do I want to be the agency that recognizes, I could maybe do 50 projects in a year, but we could do 25 projects, still make a profit, and actually enjoy our time, right? Yeah. And so it's also about sort of deciding that internally and sort of defining that culture internally and, figuring out like, hey, are we going to be the kind of agency that does a 4-day work week? Because let's all admit, nobody likes 5 days, right? We do it. It's what's sort of expected. But, 4 days, I'm finding, we're sort of doing a pilot even internally. Folks are coming back on Monday refreshed, right? Folks are coming back ready to work because they got 3 days to take care of stuff, to do stuff, to relax, to decompress, and so it's about making those decisions, which aren't just necessarily marketing decisions, but, building a brand is everything, right? It's the business overall and the relationship that you have with each of those stakeholders that you're engaging with.
That's great.
So when you tell us when the light bulb went off as far as making sense, helping your client one day, your expertise, your perspective, the light bulb came on for you when you were watching that experience with that client and you knew you were in your zone.
Yeah, well, so, a couple of things, I guess, a couple moments where it really kind of solidified for me. The first one was actually many years ago when I was actually often really hesitant to make recommendations to my client, right? I would do the research and I would say, hey, this is what we learned. Good luck. And I had a client who really pushed me on that, and she said, listen, I want your recommendation, and it's not because I'm expecting your recommendation to like be the thing that turns this business into a $3 billion business from a $100 million business. It's because I need those ideas, and I'll bounce off of those ideas, I'll react to those ideas and all that sort of stuff. And so she gave me that permission to almost like not hold myself to this standard of a consultant's recommendations have to be the thing, like it's this or nothing, right? You can just provide recommendations, provide ideas, knowing they're potentially going to pull ideas out of that. They're going to sort of bring things out of it and apply it to their own, and maybe massage that and modify that and then make it their own recommendations. So that was sort of the first moment that actually gave me a little bit of courage to be more forward in my recommendations. Say, hey, listen, I tell clients all the time, I don't know your business as well as you do, right? I'm never going to be your CMO without years of just immersion into your company. What I can tell you is what we learned, and from my years of experience and my perspective of the world and the way we think about things, here is what I think would work best based on those ideas. And that begins a discussion, right? That's what really it sort of led to, and that's what it gave me the permission to. And then more recently, in sort of those moments that I had where I was like, oh my goodness, this is it, right? Was we were having a conversation with a client. We were presenting our findings and we were talking through those ideas and things like that. And it's that the client sort of turned to us and said, this is not only exactly what we wanted, but also it's everything we didn't know we needed, right? It was these sort of surprising moments of, thinking about ideas in ways, and it wasn't as if the idea itself was like this brand new idea. It was, we looked at it from a different perspective. And that's where I think narrative really sort of comes into play, and we see with clients it clicks when I start using those sort of stories, because the thing I love about narrative and I love about story, right, is that it's of course a communication tool. It's psychologically speaking a way people make sense of the world, all that sort of stuff. It's a way that we use it, of course, in marketing and branding to help people sort of unpack who their customers are and the roles that they can play. But people remember stories far more than they remember my decks. Right? No one has walked out of a 100-slide deck and said, you remember slide 75? Amazing, right? They walk out of that 100-slide deck and you go, you remember that quote, right? Where that woman talked about the struggle she faced feeling like a good mom? Like, that's what they remember, those stories. And that's when it really sort of started to click for me of the power of narrative, not just to create better brands, but to really connect with folks, to really sort of stick with folks within the organization, not just beyond it.
Yeah, you said something really powerful for anybody out there. I want to build on this idea that I would hold back, especially in new industries when I don't have a lot of experience. And you and I have worked in the pharmaceutical, and I didn't have any experience the first project we ever had. And I relied on you for a lot of that. And I remember feeling very hesitant to ever speak up because I kept thinking I'm going to say something that would be maybe even illegal to use as an example. And so I remember being quiet. And what I've learned in the past year is that I was actually brought in many times, and I had a client tell me, your experience in the consumer packaged goods space is experience we have no idea.
Yeah.
So just give us examples that we can relate to as people as a versus pharmaceutical, executives. And I remember, oh my gosh, my value is not just in my research, it's in my experience and being able to show them a different way of looking at the same problem through a different brand that maybe they used. And that's when I realized it's actually, I need to not only bring up wild ideas, and like you said, hopefully they react to it in a good way, but also telling them in my experience on Doritos, how this could relate to your X problem. And I find that there's a lot of value that they want from me. And it's something that if you're out there listening, you should do that. Like bring those experiences, because I've never had a client say I would never, like they appreciate anything. So it's really an important concept. I was fearful for many years to do that. Very fearful.
No, I mean, I think you're totally right. And it was that realization, I think, that also sort of helped me realize the power of experience and wisdom, right? Which is, I can go into those meetings and say, this reminds me of Alzheimer's, and here's why. Or this reminds me of chips, and here's why. And this reminds me of, a nonprofit that I worked with, and here's why. And it's seeing those parallels, seeing those stories where we start to then pull from that story and sort of make it our own in that way. So I totally agree, and I think that's where they get the most value. I think, I think decks get saved and they get marked as done, and then you can send your invoice, all that kind of stuff. But what they really remember are those examples, those stories, those applications, those recommendations that are going to then, any deck I present to a client is about to go through 50 iterations of every other meeting they're going to have after that, right? And so it's as long as I can keep that nugget, that they can hold on to that idea of here's what's critical. That to me is what makes it really valuable.
Love that. Love that.
Will, you got the next question.
I do. So let's quickly talk about what can a listener do. Maybe they're running a small brand. Maybe they're running a small business. There's lots of people globally.
Yeah.
How can they use, or what advice would you give them that they want to integrate story into their work, but they may not have the resources to do some of the work that you're talking about? But what is that small business owner out there, medium business owner, what can they do right now to take some of what you're saying and help them build their brand?
Yeah. I tell folks all the time, when it comes to running like big market research projects and things like that, that's certainly a privilege that large companies have the budget for and can do. But data is data, right? Observations are observations. So if you've got customers that and you have a relationship with, you likely already have a number of stories that you've gathered from them, a number of experiences. And human beings are, in the academic world, I remember learning, we all practice this sort of folk psychology where we are constantly sort of analyzing everyone in our lives, right? And we're like, well, boy, that they're a little egotistical, right? Or they're a little narcissistic, and we've created all these diagnoses for everyone around us. And it's just about sort of recognizing and saying, okay, listen, I'm gonna think about the story that customer told me, and say, okay, where is the customer in that story, and where am I in that story, right? Okay. And just repeat that question over and over again with each customer story that you hear, right? Where is the customer? What are they trying to accomplish? And where am I in that story? And then it becomes this question of, am I where I want to be?
Yeah.
Or do I want to be somewhere else? And then I start thinking about ways to move myself in that direction. And so that sort of is how to bring story into your business at that like strategic level, at that business strategy level overall. Now, when you want to start getting into then bringing story out as a marketing sort of tactic, right? It's really about how do I tell stories that highlight my customers, that demonstrate, right, that my customers can do X, Y, and Z because of what I've done, right, because of how I've helped them. When you do that, what happens is you create, we talked about how we'll pull examples from pharma, we'll pull examples from consumer packaged goods and all those sorts of things, and it helps our clients understand. When you create those stories of a customer's experience, right, and how, we turn someone's day around because every one of our wait staff is trained to ask how you're doing and actually listen, right? You'll see that transformation, and we say, okay, when we demonstrate that we can do that, what happens is, as another customer, I see that, and our mind naturally places myself into that position. And they say, oh, if I were in that story, maybe they'd turn my day around. And that's what storytelling does. It's this sort of parallel processing of stories in which every time you hear a story, your mind runs that story with yourself in its position. And that's what good marketing is meant to do, is to create a story where the customer wants to put themselves in that story. And then when they see what they could get from that story, they then want to take the steps to actually make that story happen, right? To feel that way. And so that's that next step, is really when you're telling stories as a business, tell your customers stories. But it's not, I often sort of get back, well, what about us? How do we talk about our brand? How do we talk about our product? You always have to talk about your brand's role in that story as part of it.
One thing, I'm going to give an example. I use this example because I talk about Nick and I in my book, my son Nicholas, going on guys' night out, boys' night out, and a pizza place. So we use this pizza example a lot on the show. But as I was coming, when you're thinking about the story, so imagine you're out there in a retail store, you own a retail store, small pizza chain, pizza restaurant. A tactical example, I'm going to ask you for a tactical example too, just because we want to get into tactics. But one that came to mind was, if I knew that in my my customer story is this father wants to take his son and daughter out for boys night out, girls night out, family event. He's looking for functional things. I want good cheese. I want good value, whatever, good variety menu. But his aspirations in my world, or maybe the story is, I want to have a moment in time where I can be with my family and have a moment of connection. So maybe that's the story in my world. You tell me. But then, well, how do I create? I can certainly message to that, but what's the experience in the restaurant? What I would do is maybe I turn down the TVs that's blaring out sports. Because I'm like, that's not a moment of connection. Or maybe I would actually separate the table slightly more so I could bring my family in. And maybe I wouldn't have a lot of 2 tops. I'd have more 4 tops so I can bring my family in and we're close. So that's an example for me, a tactical example. If I knew that the story of my customer is to bring this moment of connection with my family, how can I design the restaurant? How can I get my wait staff to try to engage? Hey, it looks like you guys are together. What's your family doing? Stuff like that, just so that they can really connect. So that's like a tactical thing. Is something like that come to mind? And you may have to make it up on the spot, but just something like that for another business?
Yeah, I mean, I think like if you're that restaurant and you're trying to cater to that customer, or at least make the experience for that customer just more meaningful and help them achieve that goal, right? As some of them you've already identified, like in those booths and things like that, put plants around the booth so that there isn't as much visual distraction, right? And there's that sort of sense at the table, right? Have your menu. If you've got families coming in and you've got your standard menu and it has everything that you said, Will, you're looking for, things like that. Start recommending, or perhaps it's even sort of a hidden part of the menu in which certain appetizers can actually be doubled up and be shared appetizers, right? Certain meals can be shared meals. Desserts can be shared desserts, things like that, right? If you're there to help create these sort of family connections or just social connections at these restaurants, encourage more of those sorts of things. A lot of restaurants will also include games at their tables, right? And not just the kids' games, right? You always get the kids' menu and it has a little maze on it. Create a game that everyone at the table is basically competing at, right? And perhaps make a dessert be the reward of that game, right? And you're tracking it and you're playing along with it so that you create those memories. And it's not that you have to, as a restaurant, try to see if they can just do that by themselves, right? If for example, the reward is that dessert, you become part of that experience without necessarily taking over that experience. And so that kid may grow up, 10, 15 years from now and remember, hey, once a month we went to this X restaurant and it was game night for dessert, right? And whoever won is the one that got the double-decker brownie sundae, and I won 10 times out of 15, maybe because dad always let me, I'm not sure, right? But that's becomes that memory with that restaurant in that space. And I worked with a nonprofit as well, and they were doing a fundraising campaign around planting trees, right? It's a school, and they're planting trees as to help sort of fund the build out of the campus and things like that. And they came to me and say, hey, how do we have this sort of imperative that we're a sustainable organization. We have all of these parents and alumni of the school that we're going to try to ask to see if they'd be willing to sort of contribute to this. How do we make it more motivating for them, right? And tie back to our brand. And so one of the things that we started doing was, it wasn't just about adopting a tree and sending a letter and asking people to adopt a tree, right? Pay $5,000 for this one kind of tree or $2,000 for this other kind of tree. Send them seeds where they can plant that same tree in their yard, right? Send them a cutout of that tree so that it's not just this thing that feels like a cold transaction. I've sent $5,000 to the school. There's a tree. Maybe I'll get there one day. I'm never sure. And I'll see the tree myself. Give them a thing to put on their fridge that says, I bought X school's tree and here's that tree and here's the role it's going to play in that school, so that they feel closer to it. They feel more connected to it. And that's sort of what you can do when you're sort of using the ideas is, as a donor, right? I don't just want to give money because I can give money to anybody, right? Yep. I want to feel good about the way I gave money. And so how do you make them feel good about that? How do you make them feel good about the role they've played in your organization? And sort of ultimately sort of supporting and encouraging that.
Great.
I'm thinking about this conversation. Brands, you can feel a brand when they're not being authentic. And I feel it's that they're trying to read the room and then adjust their personality to, like that awkward guy at the party that keeps trying to insert him into your conversation with your buddies. How do you have this authentic? It really has to come from deep, the personality again, right?
Yeah.
How do you keep a brand from like wanting to be a Me Too? Oh yeah, we're authentic too.
Yeah, it's it's hard to keep a brand from doing that, but I think you're bringing up a really important point, especially nowadays, right? Where it does feel like every brand will hop onto the Pride thing, will hop onto the recent tragic event, will hop onto that, and sort of all of a sudden make it seem like they care about those things. And what you're seeing is actually a lot of backlash because, to your point, people can start to pick up when they're not, right? When you have those companies come out with messages. So as context, right? I live in Highland Park, Illinois. We just had that shooting on July 4th, and it was a sort of huge tragic event for this community. If you've got organizations coming out saying, hey, listen, we care, we want to do something for that community, and then you see they're actually supporting pro, sort of pro gun sort of choices or anti sort of mental health choices, things like that. They aren't actually doing anything that will help protect communities in the future. You start to see this disconnect, right? You start to see this, well, do they really care or not? And so that brand, and this is where I think it goes all the way back, is not just a marketing thing, right? A marketing thing is what you say to the world. Branding is what you are in the world. And that starts on the inside, right? Of your
perfect.
values as an organization and the stories that your organization tells as a culture. And I'd say to a lot of folks now is, as we've developed all of these new insights into psychology and consumer behavior and narrative and things like that, these things have become ethical choices in regards to, you can use psychology for good or evil, right? You can use it to manipulate, or you can use it to help people really sort of build meaningful connections and relationships and really sort of lift themselves up. And so as an organization, you've got to sort of really think about the choices that you're making with these tactics, with these tools, and are you helping to create really sort of meaningful, positive, kind of productive impact on the world around you, on society at large.
That's excellent. So so you say marketing is what you say, branding is what you are.
Yeah.
That's the essence of this conversation. What he hit it out of the park right
You
there.
did. I know. Incredible. I knew he would. So, hey, Kristian, we're about to wind it up here. So kind of, what are you currently working on? How can people get a hold of you, reach you, things like that? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, certainly. So I think the big thing I'm working on right now is actually the book. So wow. I saw Will Leach write a book, so I thought I should write a book too, right? And so I'm working on a book that talks a lot about these sort of same principles and how to apply them and how to do so ethically and responsibly and things like that. That is hopefully, I think, coming out early next year is when I should be done with that. Otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn. Threadline.co is our website. Just Kristian at Threadline.co is how you can reach me. We're still a boutique agency, and which is just a really fancy way for saying we're small. And so if you email me, I'm responding, and I want to talk. And connect with you and help sort of solve whatever challenges that you might be facing. So, those are probably the best ways, and that sort of is what we're working on. And of course, we're coming up on a few conferences we'll be at. So if you're at some conferences in Chicago, IIEX, Behavior is coming up, ESOMAR in Toronto, things like that. So
that's right. I will see you at IIEX Behavior.
That's right.
Steve, we got to mention that this podcast is up for it's nominated for Podcast of the Year in the marketing research field.
Well, after this episode,
for sure, right? Yeah, I forgot we didn't even mention that. Yeah, so we're gonna find out at that conference, Kristian. So if we end up winning, you could share the stage. With me.
I will be shouting the loudest from the audience.
Excellent.
You deserve the stage to yourself for that one. Yeah,
I appreciate that.
So Will, the folks that are listening, I'm sure that they would be happy to go vote and advocate for this show. Where do they go? He's turning red. He's turning red.
I don't know the website address. I do know if you go to Little Bird Marketing, that is the agency that is running the whole thing. We're not, doing it. So, but why don't we put it in the show notes? We should be doing that in the show notes, everybody. We'd appreciate, your vote. It's a really simple vote. There's a number of great podcasts that are nominated, but if it's Little Bird Marketing, you go to that, there is going to be a icon on that website somewhere, but we're going to put in the show notes, and we'll put some of that on social media too, guys, because it's important. We want to get this show out, and the speakers, we want more and more people to hear, to learn, to use these insights. And so things like that, being nominated and winning, it matters.
Yeah. Littlebirdmarketing.com, I know, is the website. But
Thank
Yes.
you. .com at least. You got to say that nowadays. You got to
Yeah.
say
Sorry,
it.
I should have had that. I put Will on the spot. I'm embarrassed. He can dance. That's why I started playing this
I'm the
music. He can
talent, Steve.
dance.
I don't know those details. I'm the talent. You're the producer.
Will, what was one takeaway from today that you?
Yeah, you know what I love, and it sounds something so small, but what I loved about what Kristian said was that this idea that your customers have a story, and understanding that story and where you fit in is a much more strategic thing that you need to worry about and do versus what's the message, what's my hook, what's my trigger, those types of things on my message. So if once you understand that story, your innovation's going to be smarter, your experience design's going to be smarter, your messaging's going to be smarter,
Absolutely.
their branding, but it starts with that story.
Yeah.
Kristian, great guest.
Yeah, Kristian, thank you so much
Thanks,
for joining us.
Thanks for
Appreciate
having me. It's a delight talking to you both, as always. So
it. Great.
Look at there. So,
Hey,
Kristian,
way to go, Kristian.
thank you, Kristen.
there's the
Jones.
link. Good job, Kristian. All right. Well, that's another great episode of the Mindstate Marketing Hour. Kristen, thanks for this outro. Be sure, did you know we have a podcast? That's right, on Stitcher, iHeart, Buzzsprout, all the places that you love to listen. Subscribe, like, and be sure to follow us on YouTube as well. Tell all your friends, your neighbors, your parents, and we'll see you next time on, let me turn this banner off here, on the Mindstate Marketing Hour.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye, guys.
everybody. You
I
take
always
care.